Chris, welcome to the program.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Travis. I'm sure things are quite interesting around there after this morning's event.
You know, Chris, we thought we were just going to sort of breeze through A-Day on Saturday. No Tua Tagovailoa out with that hand injury. You know, Jalen Hurts and Mac Jones going to be your quarterbacks of choice in that scrimmage. And lo and behold, this morning we get the report, the update from Matt Hayes at Bleacher Report in an interview with Jalen Hurts' father. Some interesting comments, I guess, as we talked about in the opening segment. I don't think anybody's really surprised that you know the ultimate in-game scenario involves one of these two guys moving on. They're just both too good to sit around and watch the other play. But to hear that you've had dealings with Coach Hurts, right? So to hear him actually come out and make those comments, were you surprised by that?
Yeah, to be frank, I was. Honestly, he's a pretty blunt guy. He always has been. I've talked to him a couple times for stories in the past. I've always enjoyed talking with Mr. Hurts. But I am a little surprised to have seen him say that on the record. It's very honest. It's what I've come to expect from him. But to see it in a public setting like that, I am a bit surprised to kind of see that in print.
Yeah, and, you know, it didn't really come across as sort of an overprotective father either. I mean, he states in the update that, look, you know, this is on Jalen too. Didn't play well enough, left the door open for Tua to get his opportunity, and Tua certainly took advantage of that against Georgia in the college football playoff national championship game. But as you look at this situation right now, and we're going to sort of go around college football and talk about some other programs that are kind of in this situation, even with Tua out, and let's say Jalen finishes spring very strong on Saturday in that 8A game, there really isn't any way Nick Saban's going to put this competition to bed one way or the other after Saturday. So, based on what we're hearing from Mr. Hurts, does it make you wonder if there's a hard and fast timeline that he has in mind for Jalen in terms of making it known who is going to be the guy against Louisville and who isn't?
Knowing Avrion, I highly, highly doubt it. When Jalen was a recruit, Avrion was almost completely hands off in terms of where Jalen was going to go to school, where he was going to end up at school. Because if Avrion had his way early in his career, Jalen would have ended up at Texas A&M, because Avrion, being a Houston area high school coach, had a really strong relationship with Kevin Sumlin at the time. Avrion set up a meeting at that point, like on an official visit, or for a visit to the home, and that's why the only at-home visit outside of Alabama Jalen had was with Kevin Sumlin, and was through Avrion. But Avrion was always pretty hands-off in that process. And knowing him and knowing the family, I really doubt that Avrion set a hard and fast line for Jalen to have to transfer. Ultimately, it's going to be Jalen's decision in that case. And knowing Jalen and knowing how competitive he's been throughout his career, I highly doubt that if this competition is indeed close, and if Nick Saban is being honest with both of them, that Jalen will end up transferring before fall camp. It would surprise me a lot if that happened.
Yeah, we're seeing more and more of these competitions go deep into fall camp. Just a year and a half ago, Jalen ended up in the job after Blake Barnett started the game against USC, and Barnett still, even in late September, managed to transfer out to a California JUCO and was eligible the very next year to play at Arizona State. So more avenues, it seems, available to quarterbacks and players in general when you consider that route of moving on than maybe in previous years. One of the comments from Avrion Hurts in the piece in relation to the possibility of Jalen playing another position, he seemed pretty strong in ruling out that possibility. And I agree with him in terms of how it relates, certainly to Alabama anyway. What about you? Do you see Jalen as a guy that could play another spot, or do you see him primarily just as a quarterback?
It's kind of funny. Jalen was actually, for a really long time as a kid, he was a wide receiver. I think that's what he wanted to do. His brother told me that. Some of his friends have told me Jalen always used to be a wide receiver. But in terms of kind of who he is, he's a little bit tall to be a running back, obviously, and he doesn't really run with that center of gravity. As a receiver, I'm not sure if he has the top-end speed necessary. And obviously you can bulk up a little bit and potentially play tight end, but Jalen does a lot of stuff really well at quarterback, and if I was him, I wouldn't want to move. He's won a national championship, even if it came from the bench. He's led his team to a 26-2 record. And I think people really forget, Jalen's going to have his technically his fourth play caller in 3 seasons this upcoming year. That can really kind of hamper a person's development as a passer. And Jalen did get better last year. It might not have been obvious to everyone, but he went through his reads a little bit better. His completion percentage ticked up a little bit. Jalen improved. Jalen's a quarterback to me, and if he's going to move somewhere, I'm sure it'll be another school to play quarterback. I doubt you'll see him do a Blake Bell at Oklahoma and switch over to tight end for Alabama. I think he's a quarterback at the end of the day, no matter what.
Yeah, I contend, you tell me what you think, Chris. I think in playing as early as he did, becoming the starter as early as he did, Jalen might have missed out on some important steps in his development as a passer, because I think he came to Alabama as a playmaker, when you combine his legs with the situation, but he was sort of a developmental prospect as a passer. And with Alabama's offense and the emphasis that they do place on some pro-style concepts in the passing game, I tend to think, Chris, that he missed out on some of that because as a starter, he was in game mode every week and possibly could have stunted his growth that way too. What do you think?
No, I completely agree. I think a redshirt year for a quarterback is critical in a lot of cases for development, especially for a guy who wasn't necessarily quite as polished as a guy like Tua coming in. And I also think you make a great point with the game things. And Alabama shaped its offense around what Jalen does well. It's been that way for the last 2 seasons. They kind of shrunk some of their passing pro-style concepts. They cut the field in half in a lot of cases. And when you're not asking a quarterback to do that from down to down, they don't have the opportunity to develop those skills in a lot of cases. And that's completely understandable if you're Alabama and you're trying to win, and it clearly worked out the last 2 seasons. But it does hamper your growth a little bit as a passer. And I don't think there's anything wrong with that. I'm sure Jalen would take the success he's had. But the situation he's been placed in, although a great one, has probably hurt him a little bit in terms of his long-term development as a passer. And like I said, he has gotten better, but I think you're making a great point there.
What about, in terms of the other side of that, I guess, though, with Tua, I'm guessing that when you look at this guy, if you're the offensive staff and you're Nick Saban, what you're seeing is the ceiling for this offense and how high that can be with Tua as compared to Jalen. From that standpoint, in terms of maximizing everyone around the quarterback position, do you see that as more of Tua, or do you think Jalen can still get to a point where he can do that as well?
I think Jalen can potentially get to that point, but I don't know if he's there right now. I've always kind of looked at the 2 passers as this. Jalen is kind of your steady girlfriend who you know exactly what you're going to get. Going to be steady with you the entire time. No real fights, no qualms or anything. And then Tua is the really hot girl across the bar who you think you have a really good chance with, and you might, but it could go back to backfire with you a little bit because Tua's a little less experienced. He has the propensity for turning the ball over a little bit more frequently. But kind of the ceiling for that situation is much better than the ceiling previously under the other quarterback, and that's kind of the balance that the coaches are going to have to take here. Tua, obviously, I think it's quite clear, can take the offense to another level, whereas Jalen, you know exactly what you're going to get from week to week. And that's just kind of what the coaches are going to have to decide. Eventually, Jalen might reach that point, but I think we all can tell that Tua is a little bit more developed as a passer at this point, both in terms of his ability to read the field and what he can do in terms of accuracy and stretching the field. So it just kind of comes down to what you want to be and what you hope to be. And Nick Saban throughout his career has kind of shown the ability to evolve, and I think that's probably the way he'll end up leaning.
Let's talk about some other programs sort of in flux at the quarterback position. We're talking with Chris Hummer, the national college football writer for 247sports.com on a Thursday edition of Southern Fried Sports, presented by Carty and Lloyd Attorneys at Law and also Mercedes-Benz of Tuscaloosa. Clemson recently completed its run through spring drills. You talk about Old Faithful, the reliable option, that's senior Kelly Bryant. But here comes freshman Trevor Lawrence with a ton of hype coming from the prep ranks as a 5-star early enrollee. And by all accounts, it seems as if Lawrence had the sort of end to his first spring in Clemson that a lot of people anticipated going forward. I know Dabo's been pretty adamant about Kelly Bryant being the guy. But how do you envision that situation playing out with Lawrence now very much in the mix?
I don't think that quarterback competition is closed at all. I think this is a little bit different than last year when Kelly Bryant kind of had the lead throughout the spring. He was the starter exiting the spring, and he kind of held on to the job there. But I think you saw kind of some of Clemson's limitations against Alabama when Kelly Bryant's your quarterback. Kind of struggled to move the ball throughout the air. He couldn't really stretch the field. His athleticism was limited by a pretty fast defense. Trevor Lawrence is kind of the quarterback ideal, and he showed all spring why he's potentially special. And you saw that in the spring game with a couple passes he made. And I don't see that battle ending anytime soon. Obviously, Kelly's going to have the advantage, but I think it's going to be one of those situations if Kelly struggles at all, there's going to be a much shorter leash on him during the season than there would have been in the past.
How about Ohio State, Chris? You've got a redshirt sophomore there in Dwayne Haskins that we saw a little bit of last year in place of J.T. Barrett, a redshirt junior in Joe Burrow, a redshirt freshman, a former highly touted recruit in Tate Martell. Interesting dynamic with this, when you talk about transfer potential, is that Burrow is slated to graduate here in the next month or so, leaving open the possibility of the grad transfer route to him. What is Urban Meyer? How does that impact maybe the process for making a decision if you're Urban Meyer?
Well, Urban's told Joe that he is going to be honest with them and make a decision quickly. So if Joe needs to transfer, he can indeed transfer. But I think we all know it would benefit Urban Meyer if Joe Burrow was back, even in a backup role next season. So it'll be interesting to see how exactly honest he is with him, because all indications coming out of the spring are Joe and Dwayne Haskins are dead even. But I think you kind of have to point out there's a reason why Dwayne Haskins backed up J.T. Barrett last season and kind of overtook Joe Burrow in that situation. And I would be surprised if Joe's done enough this spring to overtake Dwayne Haskins. And I think if you talk to anybody around that program or anybody who follows that team, Dwayne Haskins is the guy with the highest ceiling. Got a huge arm, pro-style potential in the pocket, and also enough athleticism to run kind of the option system that Urban Meyer likes to do and the power spread. And he's kind of the ideal Urban Meyer quarterback in that situation. Joe Burrow does a lot of the same things well, but doesn't have the type of arm. And it's going to be up to Urban Meyer to kind of decide quickly, because if not, he could lose Joe. But even then, you've still got Tate Martell, a former highly touted recruit, there as your third-string quarterback when it comes down to it. But I think at the end of the day, no matter what, the Buckeyes might be in better quarterback shape than they were with J.T. Barrett last year, considering what all three of those quarterbacks can do for the offense.
You talk about a power spread offense. Dan Mullen at the University of Florida now. The Gators had their orange and blue game over the weekend. Did we learn anything in terms of who will be Mullen's first starting quarterback down there in Gainesville?
I don't know if that's been decided. I think we learned something really interesting about Kyle Trask, who for a lot of people is probably an unknown. He's from Manville High School, right down the road from me. And he was actually a high school backup to De'Aaron King, who's now a wide receiver at Houston. So he's on his third year in campus, and he had a heck of an afternoon last Saturday in the spring game. But I still think Felipe Franks, with his athletic ability, his arm strength, and everything he can do in that offense, it still has to be considered the leader. Felipe actually had a pretty strong spring game as well, and a lot of his production came with his legs. And I think, as we all know, Dan Mullen can really do something with a quarterback who has the mobility. So that's the guy I would kind of point to right now, but Kyle Trask made that a much more interesting competition than it was heading into this spring after his performance over the 15 practice periods.
Chris, let's stay in state and talk about the Seminoles of Florida State, a situation at quarterback that Alabama, I guess you could say, played a role in that DeAndre Francois in the season opener in 2017 went down late in that loss to the Crimson Tide with a knee injury. Kind of been a given, or at least thought to be, that Francois, when healthy, would jump back into that mix, take over as the starter. But James Blackman played a ton of football as a true freshman last year and really had some moments where he looked like he could be the guy moving forward. Where is where is Willie Taggart at with that situation, especially when you consider maybe the off the field issues that Francois has had of late?
Yeah, that's a tough situation to parse without getting into too much off the field stuff. But first, I would say James Blackman had a really strong spring. And I think people forget just how mobile James Blackman is and kind of the offense that Willie Taggart's historically run. James Blackman is the more athletic of the two passers in the competition. He moves really well. He throws a good deep ball. It's all the things that Willie Taggart looks for in a quarterback. And he really did flash, as you said, last year. In terms of Francois, he hasn't been able to practice this spring in more than 7-on-7 capacity because he's coming back from an injury that he suffered against Alabama. And he was kind of in the doghouse entering Willie Taggart's era. He had an issue early on with Taggart, and Taggart kind of reprimanded him publicly for it. And now when you take into consideration this marijuana citation and all the other reporting that's going on around it, it kind of makes you feel a little bit better if you predicted James Blackman early in the spring. Because there's no baggage with James Blackman right now, and there's so many questions surrounding DeAndre Francois that I would lean towards James Blackman if we're projecting at this point, just because of everything that's come with DeAndre Francois the last few months.